Hello, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. This episode, the gang is back together again to talk about Nissa and how she relates to the real-world topic of burnout. We want to apologize somewhat for having been on hiatus for the past month, but as some of you might know, we've just been dealing with a lot of very important life changes. We talk about those a little bit in the episode, so stay tuned, listen for those, and, we appreciate your understanding as we go forward with this new phase of Goblin Lore. Not much has changed, but we have grown wiser, older, and hopefully sillier. So, without any further ado, let's get to the show.
Hello, Podwalkers, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. In today's episode, we talk about Nissa's backstory and the topic of burnout. But first, let's have my co-hosts introduce themselves and answer the question, how do you best like to treat yourself?
I am Joe Redeman. You can find me on Twitter at Findhorn, that's F-Y-N-D Horn. And treat yourself. Truly, genuinely, just taking a nice, long, hot bath. I'm always rushing out the door in the morning because I just have a lot of stuff to do between, making coffee and putting on my 9,000 layers of clothes to go out and deliver the mail that I just, I'm lucky if I can run through the shower really quick. So whenever I have time, I really like to have a bath and put on ambient music or Netflix or something. That's my treat myself.
That's a very sweethearted treat yourself. I like that.
I treat myself
right.
Yeah.
So I'm HobbsQ. You can find me on Twitter at HobbsQ. I like to treat myself in a couple of ways. If we're going to talk about a true treat yourself in the style of Parks and Rec, where you just do not pay attention to the money at all, I really like to go on a vacation of some sort. I mean, I really like to travel. That's something I enjoy doing. But on more of a micro scale, my daily kind of treat yourself, I like to cook. The smells in the kitchen, the tasting, just kind of making recipes, just the mindfulness that goes into chopping vegetables and slicing and everything is just something that really kind of helps put me at ease, and something that I know that. So I don't know if we've well, hey, everybody. I was thinking, we have had a while since it's been an episode of Goblin Lore. A lot of life events, one of which was my wife gave birth to a baby girl. I did not. I did very little. But Gwendolyn Marie, we had a lot of family around. And one of the things that family really wanted to do was to help out by cooking and cleaning and all this stuff when, we're trying to get used to things, which is great. But by the third day, I really needed to cook. I just love cooking. So it was really difficult for me when everybody was just like, we'll cook for you. I'm like, no, that's fine. I would prefer you didn't. So that's long-winded.
I respect it.
Good-winded.
Yeah.
And I'm Alex Newman. I can be found on Twitter at Alexander Newm. And my answer, I'm going to go with something that's kind of new. My first initial thought of how I, treat myself, if it's with games or watching shows or things, because there's a lot of different media that I enjoy and consume, but that's kind of just a more normal thing that I do most of the time. Something new that I've started doing that I'm really, really enjoying is burning candles, get Yankee Candle, or there's all sorts of different store brands. At Target, I found a Chesapeake Bay candle and just these scented candles. And I have a Jasmine Boutique one going. No, that's the word bouquet, which makes a lot more sense when put together. That I'm burning right now, and it's just something I found that I enjoy because I don't actually have a great sense of smell, and so for me, finding candles that I can actually smell. It's nice to kind of have that ambient smell. It's nice to have that little tiny flame. I mean, you got to have some tie to my goblin nature that I just light things on fire occasionally. But also for me, I'll go through my day and catch, 2 the scent of 2, maybe 3 things or something. Like, smell is not really a part of my world most of the time. And so it's nice to find ways to kind of add that to my day, and especially my space when I'm at home and I'm trying to relax. And it's like, well, let's take this smell or that smell and kind of add that to what's going on.
It's burning things, but it's delightfully burning things.
Because as we'll get into later when we talk about burnout in real life and ways to deal with it, it's a nice little preview. Finding ways to kind of treat yourself and finding a way that it can be very helpful to alleviating or treating burnout.
Because but that first, kind of burnout does not smell delightful. Or jasmine. No.
But let's talk about Nissa. Talk about her backstory.
Let's do that.
So, just some high notes, because she's involved in a lot of things. But Nissa is an animist from the plane of Zendikar. She was an elf born there. And what being an animist means is that not many elves or druids and things have connection to nature, but an animist, it goes deeper. She's not just connected to trees and animals. She feels the plane itself. And on Zendikar, that isn't necessarily a good thing. Zendikar at the time was playing prison to the Eldrazi Titans, these massive powers of raw destruction and mana that were causing the plane like pain. Like the plane was literally in pain and suffering as these powerful things were just trapped inside of it, and that caused phenomenon known as the Royal, where terrain would just shift and other things going on in the plane. And because of but the denizens, of course, of this plane didn't know that's what was causing these things. The elves, at least of her particular village, actually explain that phenomena. Their understanding of it was that the animists had done something to upset the plane, and that's why it was lashing out. So when they learned of her connection and her abilities, she was ostracized and kicked out of her village. And I think this ties into kind of the backstory and the thread that we'll go through of how she ultimately is experiencing what we look at in the Dominaria storyline and think is probably Nissa being burned out. Now without her village and her people, she decides to start investigating this pain and figuring out why the planet is in pain, because she can tell that much. She, with her connection, knows that it's in pain, but she doesn't know why, and see if she can do something about it. And that investigation led her to brushing up against Emrakul, and Emrakul's mind of chaos and unfathomableness. And that trauma caused Nissa's spark to ignite. This sent her to another world, the world of Lorwyn, where she found different elves, and this was interesting, except those elves were kind of racist. And then the plane of Lorwyn also has its own like pain and weird stuff going on with the Great Aurora, which was something that she discovered. I don't know a whole lot about the story of Lorwyn, and I think, Joe, you know more than me, because I actually stopped playing right before Lorwyn came out.
Long and short of it is that Lorwyn is in a dual phase magically. So it goes from bright and sunny and happy Lorwyn to dark and creepy and kind of messed up Shadowmoor once every, I think it's like 50 years or something. It stays that way for a while and then it flips. And that's just sort of the natural cycle. But the Queen of the Fairies disrupted that natural cycle and decided to extend the sort of phases so that she could control things. I don't remember exactly why or how or whatever. There's a lot of hand wavy, wishy-washy magic things happening, as magic stories want to do. And but yeah, then it all kind of got really dark for a long time, and that really screwed up the balance and the cycle of it all. So,
I mean, what I think is funny too is, so we talked about this in the past, and Joe's going to get mad at me for not using the correct language, but Nissa drops herself into this world where the race, the elf race, is very, very racist. I mean, they make they make the Tolkien elves look like tame. I mean, and those guys, yeah, the elves are really about like pride in their species, and like they're very special, some might say, specious,
speciesist. To see a speciesist.
They're a lot of things, but what they are is they are not very open to other races. So Nissa drops herself kind of into this now world of that.
And it's ironic too that actually that kind of factors a little into her backstory, which was retconned with the Magic Origins thing and kind of making her part of the Gatewatch, a part of the Magic Justice League. But Nissa herself was kind of an elf supremacist on Zendikar when first conceived, and now she's obviously not. But, anyway, just a fun little tidbit there.
Yeah.
But it is where she ends up here now in Lorwyn. This is the next plane that she goes to.
Yes, Lorwyn was the first plane that she went to after her spark ignited.
Yeah.
And that story of her spark igniting on Zendikar, going to Lorwyn, and then eventually going home, that was the origins, Nissa's portion of the Magic origin story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after her time there, and experiencing some elves that she decides that maybe aren't the greatest role models, she decides to go home and to see what she can do about this force that is in her plane, because now, even if it is terrible and terrifying, she has at least some idea of what it is that's causing Zendikar so much pain. And so she gets back, she starts to find there's Eldrazi spawn that are kind of being released and doing some damage. Eventually she runs into Soren, who tries to get her to help. So she's journeying with him for a little while. I think, and I can't remember because I wasn't playing at this time either, it had something to do with him being a planeswalker too, and like now she has this weird power that she doesn't understand. But so they are trying to stop the Eldrazi, while at the same time our good friend Bolus has guided 3 different planeswalkers to the Eye of Ugin.
For purely altruistic reasons. I mean, he really wants to know what is going on in this plane, how he can help.
And guided might be a strong word. He's just making casual suggestions.
Yes.
They're just right.
dropping scrolls into somebody's lap.
Yeah.
So Jace, Chandra, and Sarkin all end up at the Eye of Ugin, and they say some mean things to each other or something, and then Chandra decides to use Ghost Fire, which is this colorless flame that I don't believe is actually trademarked by Ugin, but I think he helped to invent it or something.
Don't cross a dragon's trademark. Don't even risk it. Having
this ghost, colorless fire in the eye with 3 planeswalkers, because it was 3 planeswalkers who originally locked them up, sort of opened the lock or something of the Eldrazi's prison. Now, it didn't actually fully release them, but what it did is it made, I think it opened the lock, but there was a final failsafe or something. So Soren brought Nissa to the final failsafe, and through some circumstances, he wanted her to activate it. I can't remember why he couldn't. I'm sure there was some reason. And then she decided that these things are hurting Zendikar. She doesn't want him here anymore, so she goes ahead and just lets him out. And that doesn't go so well, because her theory, in her mind, for some reason, is that they would leave because they've been trapped here for so long. If I let them out, maybe they'll just go away. But I mean, they probably would have eventually, but they decided that Zendikar was a really tasty meal, and why leave a tasty meal to go pursue a different one when you can just eat this and leave then. So then that happened.
And for a planeswalker or any magic user who's, emotionally connected, emotionally and psychologically connected to her plane, that ain't good for Nissa.
No, that's not good at all. And then, then the ensuing war with the Eldrazi trying to stop the planet from being destroyed was all sorts of all manner of trauma, I'm sure. And so eventually the Gatewatch end up there for their own the what would eventually be the Gatewatch, a collection of planeswalkers, namely Jace, Chandra, Gideon. The Gatewatch does the Gatewatch thing. Then they become the Gatewatch, and we'll just use the word as multiple types of words, which is a good sign that I need to move on to the next sentence. So then they decide to take the show on the road and go to other planes, because being planeswalkers, they can go and help other people. No one else really can in the multiverse. All these worlds have all these troubles, and those people are just stuck there having to deal with it. But the Gatewatch can go and try to help. So they decide that that's what they're going to do. So for some reason, they end up on Innistrad, and it's horrible. Because that's what Innistrad is.
Yeah, I mean, they leave from this like world where this gothic horror, these eldritch kind of beasts, to one of literally gothic horror. I mean, that's where they go next.
Yeah, they go to the gothic horror world.
And it was shocking because, lo and behold, the gothic horror literally shows up.
Yeah, and and Jace has the biggest part in this story in the first set in particular, but then it's towards the end of the story when they're trying to surprise everyone. Everyone was surprised because Emrakul shows up in Eldritch Moon, and now the Gatewatch has dealt with 2 Eldrazi's and they're trying to deal with the 3rd. So Nissa tries to tap the ley lines like she did on Zendikar in the final battle to deal with the Eldrazi. And that doesn't go so well on this plane because, well, Innistrad is kind of corrupted. Yeah. The ley lines, you want to take that, Joe?
Well, yeah, so the ley lines are kind of the, like, if you think about sort of, what we learned in basic geography about like the longitude and latitude lines, the meridians that theoretically stretch all the way across the world, like think about that, but those are like magical rivers, or like maybe even like real rivers, but except they're magic. And those are all kind of like woven into the fabric of these planes. And Nahiri, when she gets to Innistrad, took all of those ley lines and warped them and messed them up so that she could summon Emrakul to the plane as vengeance against Sorin, and then put Sorin in a rock. She didn't need the ley lines for that. That was just a nice little cherry on top, and take that, Sorin.
She's just really good at rocks.
She's good at rocks. Great skill. Yeah, so when Nissa gets to Innistrad, she feels how warped the ley lines of the plane are and how corrupted and sort of dissonant the magic is on the plane, for a plane that already has like crazy dissonant magic because vampires and devils and werewolves and all sorts of crazy stuff happening.
Yeah.
So Nissa basically steps out of the frying pan into the fire.
Right.
She leaves stress right back into stress.
Exactly. And then from there, like, she ends up on a city. So like the next thing is they end up in Kaladesh. I know they spent a little time at Ravnica in between, which of course is a big giant city, which probably wasn't great for her to go to Kaladesh, where there's a big giant city. So I mean, there's that. But
in the middle of a really nerdy inventors fair too. She probably really hated that.
All these stupid inventions and whirring gears, and
she's just sitting there with a disenchant, waiting like, I'm gonna get this.
I think it would be naturalized, Joe. Disenchant's a white spell.
I'm gonna go fracturing gust.
That's both. So then, in this city world, she oddly, ironically, maybe, I don't really want to touch that word because then you get people who are all upset about it. So
isn't it ironic how upset people get about it?
Oh gosh. I wonder how much of the Alanis Morissette I can put into this without us getting sued.
Don't you just have to like break it up so it's just a few seconds at a time?
Yeah,
it's
I don't know. I don't know how copyright works.
Well, okay, copyright. It's like rain on your wedding day.
Oh, is that what it's like? Is that what going to Kaladesh is?
Okay. It's like I'm not going to keep this bit going.
Wow, I am thankful.
Uh, so in any event, she actually, despite first hating this world, discovers that of all the worlds she's been to, there is like the greatest actual balance between nature and the city and this wonderful flow through the aether, a force that she ignored to begin with, but the aether, which is, a fuel source used for these inventions, is a place where there are sky whales living. Like, I think there's the allusion to the fact that it's probably more complex and there's more going on with it than the people on the plane even realize. And I think Nissa kind of taps into some of that, where it's part of this natural cycle for the plane. And she actually finds this place that's a great, I don't know if calming is exactly the right term, but a place where she found some beauty and some nice things which was probably a nice follow-up to my home is in pain. Oh, I found a planet that kind of sucks and is also hurting. Now I'm on a plane where everything is bad. And now she's on this fourth world where there's actually a balance to it all.
But wait, there's more.
But wait. Yes.
Remember how we talked about messed up ley lines? Just you wait until we get to Amonkhet.
Yes. Messed up ley lines on Innistrad were child's play compared to what happened on Amonkhet, which was where they ended up going next. Through the events of Kaladesh, the Gatewatch learned, that Bolas is up to stuff, and they're starting to get some glimpse of just how far-reaching his plans are. And they decide, against the advice of Ajani, who once fought Nicol Bolas, that the best thing to do would be to go right to the middle of Bolas's plans on the plane of Amonkhet and see if they could break him.
Are you saying that, once again, like I've tried to say numerous times, Bolas just wants to be left alone?
I think that is exactly what I'm saying. That had the Gatewatch not gone to Amonkhet, nothing bad would have happened.
Right.
To them, at least. I mean, the plane probably would still have been in trouble, but...
Well, now you're splitting hairs now.
You're right. I can't really speak for the citizens of Amonkhet. Maybe getting a nice shiny set of blue armor have been beneficial to all of them.
I think the real lesson here is, please listen to your cat, Dad. He just wants the best for you.
That is actually an episode that's coming eventually. So, on Amonkhet, Nissa finds another planet with twisted and mangled ley lines, only this time far more serious, far more sinister, far more expert. I mean, Bolas is an expert at twisting and mangling.
Seriously, like, Nahiri took the ley lines of Innistrad and warped them to her ends, but that kind of like backed up and screwed up all the mana on the plane. Nicol Bolas saw that and was like, hold my beer. And instead just like basically reshaped the fabric of Amonkhet. Like, he completely remade the reality on Amonkhet, which is incredible.
And in one of my favorite little story bits, they're talking about this, and they actually kind of echo back to that in M19, because this is right as the mending is happening. So Bolas knows he's losing his god, unlimited godlike powers as being a planeswalker, and so he decides to set a plan in motion, a plan that we're still finding out what it is. And he goes to Amonkhet, and with these powers that are left, he changes the plane to fit what he needs. And so one of the ways that I've kind of been interacting with Magic over the last few years is I've been picking up pack foils of every story spotlight card. And then I have just a binder where I kind of have the story starting in Kaladesh, because then they even had the tokens that numbered them. At least they did then. I think with the Ravnica ones now, they're not numbering the cards. They don't have that. But to kind of tell the story of these sets. And when we got to M19, it's the first set since Kaladesh where they didn't have the story spotlight cards. Mm-hmm. But what they did have is a trio of cards in Bolas's colors that were... one mythic, two rares that were just kind of big splashy spells that told the story of what he did on Amonkhet. And so you have Apex of Power, which is some ludicrous sorcery in red that lets you do things and has wonderful, all these have some great Bolas referencing flavor text. Apex of Power has Nicol Bolas being quoted as saying, As I desire, so it shall be. Probably my favorite name of any magic card ever is the second one,
Okay.
which is a black sorcery called Fraying Omnipotence.
Oh yeah.
That is just so evocative. It's wonderful. It is so wonderful. And then it references in the flavor text, the great mending that healed the multiverse also unraveled the threads of Nicole Bolas's power. And then finally in this one, the final piece is patient rebuilding. And by the way, all of these have sweet art that looks so good in foil. And patient rebuilding, the flavor text says, Nicole Bolas would not rest until he was restored to his former glory.
Yes.
Which is kind of cool to give us this just a little glimpse into what Bolas is doing. But that just kind of shows you, like, that planet was messed up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because Bolas showed up with godlike powers at the beginning and worked in a hurry while these powers lasted to carve what he needed this place to be as a tool towards his ultimate goals. And part of that was reshaping the gods that were part of the plane, that are actual mana, raw mana tied to the plane and twisted to fit his ends.
And Nissa shows up again. And one thing that we have to realize is this is not a long period of time.
No.
This is actually a fairly short period of time that all of this is going on.
Like in universe, this is maybe 2 years.
Right. And you know, there's a lot of the Gatewatch kind of involved, but we have Nissa really being at, I think, the forefront of this bouncing around from plane to plane, especially given her sparking from such a kind of tough situation with inadvertently assisting the Eldrazi to then end up basically back in Lorwyn, and now she's just going place to place. It's incredible
finding out.
Yeah.
I think too, like, she doesn't get the experience of seeing all these beautiful worlds, all these very different worlds, and seeing like, oh wow, this one is different from the other because of this. Like Jace, I think, can at least like sort of intellectually study these new planes. Gideon can sort of like understand the structure and the society on each of these new planes. You know, Chandra can enjoy some of the experiences and all this sort of stuff. And Nissa, her first reaction to all of these planes is, oh my gosh, there is so much pain here.
Yes.
You know, and I think that's like encapsulated when the group gets to Dominaria, you know, which is where everything kind of blows up, and she chews out the Gatewatch, or what's left of the Gatewatch, and bounces, because Dominaria, you know, as long time fans of the game know, at least, it has suffered cataclysm after apocalypse after devastation time and time again over millennia, and don't think that Nissa can't feel every single layer of that.
Oh yeah.
Because it's only just once we get to this set too that it's finally starting to rebuild and rebound after all of these horrible events.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think too that perspective that she has, I think that's why she reacts that way. Is she feels the pain of Dominaria, and she feels the horrible things that have happened around, and that the Gatewatch is having to do, and she bounces. She doesn't really see the rejuvenation, which I think she would be able to feel if she hadn't gone through all of these other corrupted and devastated planes just prior.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think her filter is kind of set to that once she gets there.
Yeah. And I think another thing that isn't helping is the fact that I don't think she really knows how to deal with people.
No.
She was ostracized from her village relatively young age. I can't remember the exact age, but young enough that would have had an impact on how she interacts with people and how she gets along with others, and especially if she's got this connection to planes. Yeah. So when now all of a sudden she's in a group that's working towards ends, but they're not necessarily working towards ends in a way that so she's going to all these places that she doesn't necessarily think that they should be. Or maybe she does, but she doesn't care. That she's kind of getting swept along a little bit, and then dealing with these people, and then you get to the whole thing with Liliana, who kind of not really necessarily tricked, but she definitely pushed to bring the Gatewatch to Amonkhet so she could deal with one of her demons there, one of the demons that she'd made a pact with. And so when the group gets to Dominaria, I'm sure Nissa is not feeling great, because this planet and all of those apocalypse going back thousands of years, even before the time of Urza, so we can't even blame them all on him. And then she finds out that Liliana is here for her last demon. And it's like, well, no, you know what? I'm done dealing with her. I think she even says something like, "Yeah, you all can get killed by her, but I'm gone." The reason that she gives, and I'm sure it was definitely a part of it, is that she's like, I'm not dealing with Liliana and her demons anymore and her manipulation.
Yeah.
And she leaves, and also through this whole thing, as she's going to all these planes too, her homeworld, like, no longer under threat of Eldrazi, but it's not in a good place. It is in it's horrible condition and terribly damaged. And so the whole time she's going to these other planes, it's like in her head, I'm betting there's the voice of, why am I here helping them with this? I should be back home helping recover. I should be back home helping to rebuild.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's gotta weigh on you when you can feel the pain of an entire plane, when you can feel the pain of your conscience, all of that. You kind of don't get that respite, you don't get that chance to rejuvenate yourself, to revive.
We've kind of led into this a little bit, talking about this concept and this idea of burnout. I think that it leads very nicely to kind of Nissa's story is a good jumping off point for this, because burnout is something that I think we've all experienced and we've talked a lot about on the cast. I know this is going to be shocking to everybody, but even recently we've all kind of had this.
You mean that month-long hiatus we took was not just because it was blizzarding and we couldn't mail each other each of these audio files?
That was probably a good part of it.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, but the question becomes, what was that? What
right.
What was going on? We had, like you said, there was blizzards, there was job stuff. We all had different job things that were going on in our lives. There's been a lot going on, to the point of kind of having to talk about this as a cast and being very open about what our experiences are, about, the time that we do have, how we allocate it, how we take care of ourselves, because we find it to be such an important project. And we do find it to be something that is, I would say, a net good for us. But it is still stressful. It is still there's still burnout from anything that you do. As much as you enjoy doing it, there's going to be burnout. And Alex, you kind of recommended this idea. You kind of came up with a big portion of what we wanted to do here. And so I think this was a great place for us to start, because Nissa is such a good example of what somebody who is so caring and thoughtful, and because of that, may be putting herself at more of a proneness to burnout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we want to talk about kind of, let's just give a quick definition. At least this is my definition, and you guys kind of speak up depending on what you think of this. But that burnout is a feeling of mental and physical exhaustion. It's feeling debilitated, detached, and unable to continue caring or coping. How does that seem to fit with you guys?
That's a pretty solid definition right there.
I'll choose that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's there's lots of ways to kind of get there. So stress is a thing. Stress is a factor that can cause it. It can occur for all sorts of reasons, but it's tied to things that cause pain, worry, and doubt. Burnout is this overall generalized feeling of exhaustion and being unable to deal with a situation in general.
So stress is kind of the input. Burnout's kind of the output. Is that a reasonable?
I think. Yeah, I think there's other things can cause some burnout, but stress is definitely the biggest factor.
Okay.
I suppose maybe I'm wrong on that because I can't think of another one. But I know I get burnout on things because I'm worrying about stuff, and I know tied to my anxiety sometimes, I'll get burnout on even things I enjoy. Burnout on games or whatever because I'm. So here's a weird little picture into my personality. I have some like compulsive collecting things. I mean, I'm a Magic player, of course, and I also have this like very structured portion of my personality that wants to do things in an ordered way. So I like, for instance, with a lot of modern game systems, you have achievement systems or trophies on the PlayStation, and so there are times where like I really like these systems because it gives me a way to feel like I'm working towards something even when I'm just doing a hobby. And so on the positive end of those systems, it encourages me to go do things in the game I might not otherwise do because I want to go get that achievement. It can give me that sense of accomplishment or sense of progression as I'm working towards things. But it can also push me to do things that I'm not finding fun. And doing those things for an extended period of time can cause burnout. And I just decide that I can't play this game anymore. I don't want to play this games. I've just stopped playing video games for periods of time because I become more wrapped up in hitting goals that I set for myself than having fun. And it becomes not fun anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's a slightly different angle towards this, but a similar idea of getting burned out on something you enjoy or something positive. I mean, Hobbs, you were talking about this on Twitter the other day, and this is something that I completely agree with. I think you and I have both this past couple weeks, like, we both had very big positive changes in our lives, but those have both been exhausting changes. For you, it was the advent of Miss Gwennifer David Hobbs. That's her legal God-given name.
Yeah, I mean,
it's her legal goblin lore name.
That's her legal God-given name.
I mean, it was really odd. I have to admit this when we got the Social Security card in the mail, and that's what it said on it. Was not expecting it. Flat out, will tell you, was not expecting that.
I've got pull in various government agencies. Don't worry about it. But yeah, so baby Gwen came along and has been, I'm sure, one of the hugest joys of your life. But that's a tiresome thing to have to deal with. And for, the Findhorn family, it's been, finding and negotiating to get a house, which we finally just did this past week. But that, even in and of itself, it's a tiresome process, and there's so many things to think about and so much to have to do involved with that. And so, I mean, yeah, each of those things has led to really positive and really exciting and really joyous outcomes. But man, those are tiring things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I will say, too, that kind of along this line is one of the things that's interesting, and we talk to from a psychological perspective when we're talking about psychology. Stress is a common topic that we discuss. Stress in general. You kind of alluded to the input versus output type of thing. Stress itself can come from, as you've said, positive life events, negative life events. We often talk about the fact that stress in and of itself is not a bad thing. Stress actually can be very motivating. Stress can get us to do, the things that we need to do in our lives, can make us a lot more effective at whatever we're trying to accomplish, our goals. You need to have some sort of stress, actually. If you don't have stress, you actually have the chance of kind of, if you don't have the need to, like a deadline or something that's a pressure, odds are you may never accomplish anything because there's no sense of urgency. There's nothing driving that. So we talk about that kind of a lot in psychology, about this idea that you need to have some level of stress. That is actually something that you need. Now, when we're talking about burnout, it's because positive or negative, the stress has gotten to the point where Alex kind of said it is exhausting and you cannot kind of cope with it, your strategies are no longer working. It is a concept that people, I think, ignore in some ways, which I think can lead to people not doing what they need to do when things are going well or they have exciting things going on in their lives. They don't necessarily want to acknowledge the fact that that can come with incredible stress that can lead them to burnout, to lead them to disengaging from areas of their life.
So I think we've kind of talked about how to identify, what it is. It's these feelings of being unable to cope, or these feelings of detachment. So let's kind of go into some ways to mitigate it. As we talked about at the opening. There's strategies to mitigate it, to help prevent it. You're going to have some of these things happen, and then you have the strategies when that happens to kind of deal with it, to come back from the burnout.
Yeah, we actually oftentimes draw this line between coping with versus preventing, knowing that there are certain things that you can prevent, but you're never going to prevent all of it. And as I said, it probably isn't a good idea if you want to make changes or if you want to be doing new things. It probably isn't good to completely eliminate stress. So there has to be different strategies for prevention versus coping with.
See, I knew if I stumbled around that, you'd come in with a much more eloquent way of saying what I was trying to say, because we're in sync. Like you'd get what I was trying to go for, and then help me out there. So I really appreciate that.
This entire podcast is just a bunch of goblins stacked up with a trench coat over it. One of us will reach the top shelf.
Are you calling us all short?
I think we all are.
Yeah.
It's he calls it like he sees it, because he's low to the ground like the rest of us. This is kind of the kernel that I wanted to build this podcast. I built this podcast around is a way to help prevent burnout, which is cultivating multiple personal identities. It's a thing I don't think a lot of people think about, at least in this context. We talk about identity in some very specific contexts, but things like an identity as your job. I work in treasury. My identity as a person who works in treasury for an insurance company, which I missed the whole jobs and guild structure thing, so I mentioned to Joe, my job's Orzhov. It's hell. I just have to share that. I'm in the treasury department of a financial company.
Yeah.
It is the money people of the money people.
Wow.
So
banks on
is
banks.
there another guild? Is there there's like a guild underneath a guild there?
Yes.
Wow. Like your company is like the public face of the Orzhov. You're the sketchy Orzhov.
Thank you. So then, in addition to that, I have my identity through my hobbies. Like as a gamer, I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and as a Magic player, as a member of this podcast. But I draw identity with from my relationships that I have with my parents, my family, my sister and her kids, my friends, and all of these are different pieces of the whole of me, but each of them is an identity of who I am. And that helps to mitigate if work is going crappy. I can come and talk to these two goblins and we can do a thing, and that's still a part of who I am. And even if work isn't great, there's more aspects to my life and more aspects to who I am, so that I don't feel, so that burnout it doesn't happen as quickly or maybe as widespread.
One of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes is this idea of black or white, these dichotomies, where we've said from very early on, from basically episode 1, that almost nothing exists at those extremes, that there are dimensions to all of us, that there's intersections. It's the whole idea that people sometimes struggle with, I think, when thinking about privilege or thinking about diversity, is that there are intersections, that right. That you can acknowledge the fact that you can be privileged in one area while not in another, and those are going to overlap in a specific area, that somebody can be experiencing just harassment along more than one axis. It isn't just because they are a certain way and it's one thing about them. It oftentimes is how those things interplay with each other. It's why this idea of just the multiple identities, as you said, Alex, is so important, I think, because a lot of us are used to, at least I can think of myself in the past, thinking of myself very monolithically, and I think I had a lot less ability to cope and deal with things when I saw myself that way. You've talked about this a lot, Alex, of toxic fandom oftentimes grows out of this when somebody's identity is so intermeshed and tied to one thing.
Yeah, and I think makes sense to me, that if someone's identity is wrapped up into a single thing or a very small selection of things, any change to that or an attack to that could feel like a threat or an attack to them.
Right.
I have a friend who, what was I talking to him about? Some movie, the details of it don't actually matter, but I kind of had to tiptoe around the fact that I'm like, well, I think it was a good movie in general, but I really didn't like some of these things, and he had to take a step away because he loved this thing and it was great, and it kind of hurt him that I wasn't a big fan of it. And so I think a much more extreme version of that is something that contributes to toxic fandom. These people who have decided that this property is so tied to them that changes to it are tantamount to a threat to them.
We like to have some sort of actionable advice. So we talked about the multiple identities as being maybe a protective factor, a way that if you have those built in, you might be able to do a little bit better of kind of coping when it comes up, or even preventing some of the stress that's in your life because you have these other areas that you can lean on.
Sort of like social circuit breakers.
Right. And Alex, you had mentioned kind of wanting to talk about, like, what are some ideas? What are some ways that we can cope with or deal with burnout once we've identified it? Because once again, identification is the first step. I mean, I would say that's actually probably very, very important if you're not used to doing. People, I think, could do better at starting to identify what's causing the stress or the burnout. Because if you don't know what's causing it, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. It's as simple as that.
Yep. Yeah, and identifying it really is the most significant thing, because, like, I think by and large, the best ways to deal with it are the simple things that people understand. If something's causing you stress in a harmful way, try to take a step away from it, or maybe identify what exactly it is about it that's causing you stress. If you're not enjoying playing Magic because this one person in your group isn't great, or because this one thing isn't great, see what you can do about that one element. Maybe talk to the person, maybe talk to other people, maybe try playing with someone else. If it's your deck, try a different deck. I mean, there's lots of ways, if it's smaller things, to try to mitigate around it.
Taking a break is not necessarily a bad thing. And I would like to caution or make kind of just a statement here that there's a difference between avoidance and taking a break. Because we've talked about this in the past, especially with social anxiety, PTSD. Avoidance kind of generalizes whatever you're feeling to more than one situation. Avoidance could actually cause it to be worse. Taking a break is not the same thing as avoidance. Now, they could look the same because you will be avoiding or you will be staying away from certain elements. You're doing it in a purposeful manner that you're aware of. You need to be aware of the fact that you're doing it. And ideally, you are doing it with the idea that you will come back to whatever it is if it is something that is important to you.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. I thank you for that, because that fits into quite nicely to some of the things I've dealt with my social anxiety. Like, that was a long string of avoidances that were not conscious choices, and that started to lead to really a narrowing of my world, and then it was when I started to make those conscious choices to go out into things is where that opened up, and I think burnout is something similar. If you make intentional choices to step away from things, or intentional choices to change how you are interacting with those things, that can help to remove or deal with the burnout.
Yeah. Now, at the end of the day, there's still going to be situations that we either cannot step away from, or that we have to be able to cope with or work with because we just don't have options. Family relationships that are important to you or other relationships can be this way. Work.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to just be like, just quit your job, go get a new one. Like, we've got a great economy right now. You could find a new job in 10 seconds. Like, okay, that's not really going to teach me how to deal with burnout because jobs are stressful and I'm never going to be in a job that's not going to have some element of burnout.
Right.
So then it becomes, I'm just curious. So have you guys tried things to stay in the environment and to still cope with it? Or
for the most part, my burnout at work is the big one. Has been transitory and things that I know are only going to last for a certain amount of time. So for me, it's less been trying to treat the actual burnout and more it's like identifying I am currently burned out. Now I'm going to take steps to mitigate the effects of it until I can kind of weather the storm and then things calm down. And that can be small things like candles, for instance. Taking a bath, taking some time to do something like that. I have literally taken my 15-minute break at work to put on headphones and listen to very loud music sometimes. And that was what I needed to break up that time of that continuous, hours in the afternoon of stress and dealing with things and give me 15 minutes where I close my eyes, I listen to something loud, and then I go back to deal with the rest of the day.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned it's doing things like taking your break at work, if that is possible to do. It's reminding yourself that you need to step up. And I now do my stretches that I need to do as I'm an old man. I try to do them at work at times when I notice that I am being less than productive than I need to be or want to be. So I will try to do my stretches, or I will make sure that I go for a walk, even if it's just to get a cup of coffee or to do something. It's stepping away from my desk, but I'm still in the environment. I'm not like taking a break from work for days on end. I'm reframing. Okay, this needs to get done, but I can't do it in the state of mind that I'm in right now.
Yeah, and that's something that that they explicitly trained us to do. My work at the post office too is, say the last block you dropped a whole stack of letters and they it seems like they all got out of order and you got flustered and frustrated and all that sort of stuff. The first thing that my trainer said to do is stop, take a breath, look at how they spilled, work them backwards to get them back into a stack, and keep going. And then if you're still frustrated at the end of that block, take your 10-minute break. Take that time off to just say, okay, I need to reset. That's it.
I really thought you were going to say that he taught you to say stop, drop, shut them down, open up shop. Oh no, that's how Rough Riders roll.
No, it's a little more like a free ride when you've already paid. That was a long payoff.
Callback. That is a good callback.
But yeah, I think too, another thing that I've done to sort of cope with burnout, listening to things to help take your mind off of it, taking a break and stepping just maybe not away necessarily, but to the side of the problem for a second before you go back and confront it. For me too, it's also looking for those little elements of positives. So, a lot lately at work, I've been getting a lot of extra work thrown on top of me and having to still get it all out in the same amount of time because that's just where we're at right now. And the thing that I've tried to do specifically is find these small moments where I can, enjoy something, whether it's, oh, hey, look, the sun came out at this moment. That's cool. That feels nice. Or, seeing a cardinal sitting in a tree, because fortunately I work outside, so I can take a lot of nature things as my positive moments. Or maybe the podcast I'm listening to makes a particularly funny joke, and just, appreciating that moment. Or, I don't know. There's just a lot of small things you can do, and I think looking for those tiny moments of positivity or joy or beauty can really help to to sort of pull the Jenga blocks out from underneath the stress and what will lead to you burning out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the you mentioned in the podcast things what made me think of this, but the multiple identities thing can help, because there are days where work is terrible, but I got to listen to 2 hours of a book that I was listening to and I really enjoyed, or I'm like, what, I'm just gonna deal with this, and then when I get home, I'm gonna go do this thing in this game that I've been waiting to do for a while and I've been building towards, or there's all sorts of ways when you have other things to look forward to in your life, other things going on. It gives you that outlet, the circuit breakers you said, Joe, to kind of help to relieve some of that stress, to sink as kind of a heat sink, to put some of that stress into. Yeah,
absolutely. It's like it's some good advice that you just didn't take, and who would have thought it figures?
Oh boy.
That's our show. You can find the podcast at Goblin Lore Pod, or email any questions, comments, or concerns to goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support your friendly neighborhood gobslugs, you can do so at patreon.com/goblinlorepod. Goblin Lore is hosted by HobbsQ, who you can find on Twitter at HobbsQ. This episode was written, produced, and hosted by Alex Newman, who you can find on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. Engineering and editing for this episode was done by Joe Redeman, who you can find on Twitter at Findhorn. That's Fynd Horn. Our music is by Wintergatten, who you can find at Wintergatten, that's Winter, GATAN.com. Logo by Stephen Raphael on Twitter at Stephen Raffle. Goblin Lore is a member of the Geek Therapy Network, which you can check out at geektherapy.com or at Geek Therapy on Twitter. And remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.